Hello and welcome to MEE Live. Join us as together we take another look at the stories shaping our world.
We are broadcasting live to YouTube and X from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London.
I'm Mohammed Hassan.
And I'm Matilda Mallinson. Today is Thursday, the 5th of June.
So, Matilda, big news overnight from the US.
Yeah, we learned last night that Trump is bringing back one of his most divisive first-term policies, and that is the travel ban.
The Muslim ban that wasn't a Muslim ban.
The Muslim ban that wasn't a Muslim ban. Exactly. The White House has said that this is about national security. This is about keeping terrorists out of the US. But here at Middle East Eye, we had a look at some of the intelligence and the data on what is driving terrorism inside the US. And comparing that to the list of countries subjected to this travel ban, it's not totally clear how the White House came to the conclusion and why they have been listed as the greatest threats to US homeland security.
I have my thoughts, but I think we should leave it to the experts.
Yeah, we will be bringing in an expert, a political analyst and strategist who will be able to clear up some of the decision making. But there's sort of a second question I want to ask, because the data tells us that actually far-right extremism is driving far more terror attacks in the US than Islamism. And so we have to ask ourselves, at a time of heightened racialized violence, will this travel ban do more to shut down terrorism in the US, or could it have the opposite effect?
Interesting. Well, speaking of numbers, this week we saw a YouGov poll come out measuring the way that Europeans feel about the state of Israel, and it was pretty shocking.
I saw this. It was not looking good.
No, it's actually the lowest public support for Israel on record, and it is a huge story. And now, of course, the Israeli government itself isn't too concerned with these numbers, but what we want to find out here at MEE is what Israelis themselves feel about this increased pressure towards Israel.
And are they feeling it at all? Are they even aware of this changing attitude towards the population and to the policies, rather, that the government is coming out with?
Exactly. So we're going to be joined by an academic and a philosopher from Israel who actually controversially called publicly for international sanctions to be placed on Israel as a last-ditch effort to end the war in Gaza.
Very interesting. First, though, let's take a look at the headlines.
Israel's government is accused of arming an ISIS-affiliated gang in Gaza to bolster opposition to Hamas. The country's opposition leader and former defense minister Avigdor Lieberman says Israeli forces under the prime minister's orders are giving weapons to crime families in the Palestinian enclave. Netanyahu's office has not denied these claims. Several Israeli media outlets have identified the group in question as Abu Shabab, run by prominent clan leader Yasser Abu Shabab. The militant group claims to oversee humanitarian efforts in Rafah, but have been accused of looting aid trucks. Its members have also been linked to fighting with ISIS groups in neighboring Sinai. Last week, Hamas released footage showing it was targeting members of the group, accusing them of collaborating with Israel. Speaking to Israeli media yesterday, former defense minister Avigdor Lieberman accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of arming the gang without cabinet approval.
פתאום מדינת ישראל מחלקת נשק לכל מיני חמולות, כמו חמולה שאלו סלפיסטים, מזוהים עם דאעש, הם מקבלים נשק ממדינת ישראל. זה טירוף מוחלט. אני לא בטוח שזה עבר קבינט, וקבינט אישר את זה. לא ברור לי מי החליט.
אז זהו, החלטה של מי?
ושתבין, נתניהו, כמו שפעם הוא ניסה לבנות משקל נגד רשות הפלסטינית חמאס, עכשיו הוא בונה את דאעש כמשקל נגד חמאס בתוך רצועת עזה.
This morning, the Prime Minister's office released a statement saying, quote, Israel is working to defeat Hamas through various means based on recommendations of all the heads of the security establishment. The accusation adds weight to the claim that Israel has attempted to disrupt and sabotage the distribution of aid in Gaza. Meanwhile, the controversial US and Israeli-backed initiative, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, suspended all aid for a second day, just 1 week after they began operations. More than 100 Palestinians were shot and killed over the last week while queuing to collect aid boxes at the poorly managed sites.
Yesterday, the US vetoed a UN Security Council resolution that would have called for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and complete and unrestricted humanitarian access to the Strip. all 14 other members voted in favor of the resolution, which would have also seen the release of Israeli captives held in Gaza. It's the sixth resolution the US has vetoed, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza since October 2023. Washington said this latest resolution undermines ongoing diplomacy to resolve the conflict and claimed it, quote, draws false equivalence between Israel and Hamas. But condemning the veto, China's ambassador Fu Kong said Israel's actions have, quote, crossed every red line of international humanitarian law. Yet, due to the shielding by one country, these violations have not been stopped or held accountable.
Now for an exclusive story. The British government believes Amal Clooney could be sanctioned by the US over her role advising the ICC on their arrest warrants issued for Israeli leaders. Multiple sources within the British government told MEE that last week the Foreign Office's legal directorate listed the prominent human rights lawyer as being potentially at risk of US sanctions for being part of an independent panel of legal advisors convened by the ICC prosecutor. Last November, Karim Khan announced that the ICC is issuing arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. In response, the Trump administration imposed financial and visa restrictions on the ICC's British Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan. In a statement published by the Clooney Foundation for Justice, Amal Clooney said she served on the panel because she believed in the rule of law and the need to protect civilian lives.
Every year, millions of Muslims from across the world gather in Saudi Arabia to perform Hajj, an annual Muslim pilgrimage. One of the largest gatherings in the world, more than 2 million Muslims from around 188 countries took part in the pilgrimage this year, which began on the 4th of June. Today marks the second day of Hajj, the day of Arafah, when pilgrims arrive at a hill known as Mount Arafat and pray for forgiveness. It's the climax of the spiritual journey of Hajj. Hajj culminates with the 3 days of Eid al-Adha, which will commence tomorrow. This Eid is the second of the 2 Eids in the Islamic calendar, and pilgrims and Muslims across the world sacrifice an animal or pay for it to be done in their names and distribute a portion of that meat to the poor. The Hajj season coincides with the summer months in Saudi Arabia, and each year many struggle with the heat and demanding physical toll of the journey. Saudi authorities say they have stepped up precautions to prevent heat-related deaths after 1,300 people died in last year's Hajj. Now, stay tuned as we turn our attention to the United States, where Donald Trump has announced a travel ban on 12 countries. You may notice a theme. This is MEELive's Deep Dive, where we dive into a story shaking up the world. US President Donald Trump has banned nationals of 12 countries from traveling to the US in an expansion of his divisive first-term policy.
The recent terror attack in Boulder, Colorado, has underscored the extreme dangers posed to our country by the entry of foreign nationals who are not properly vetted, as well as those who come here as temporary visitors and overstay their visas. We don't want them. In my first term, my powerful travel restrictions were one of our most successful policies, and they were a key part of preventing major foreign terror attacks on American soil. We will not let what happened in Europe happen to America. That is why today I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others. The strength of the restrictions we're applying depends on the severity of the threat posed, but we will not allow people to enter our country who wish to do us harm, and nothing will stop us from keeping America safe. Thank you very much.
It's the latest in a string of immigration crackdowns that Trump promised on his campaign trail before last year's presidential election. In an announcement on Tuesday night, the president revealed a list of countries totally banned from US travel. The list also showed 7 other countries facing sharp new visa restrictions. The White House said the bill is a measure to keep out foreign terrorists, a policy focused on national security and public safety. But the populations identified in this list do not line up with the government's own intelligence about what causes terror attacks in the US. Here you see the statement from the White House saying this is about national security, public safety, and the prevention of terror attacks. The most recent report, however, from US Homeland Security identified twice as many terror attacks caused by domestic politics, racism, and misogyny than those tied to foreign affairs or ideologies. And when it comes to hostile nations, the People's Republic of China, Russia, and Iran were identified as the most serious threats to US infrastructure and public safety. Of these, only Iran made the list of banned countries. Academic research also consistently shows there are far more domestic terror attacks in the US than foreign ones, and that far-right violence has caused more deaths than Islamism since 9/11 brought the latter to the limelight. But while Trump has consistently blamed, quote, foreign terrorists for disorder, his administration has diluted their rhetoric on domestic terrorism, even banning terms used to refer to it, like racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism, and shutting down measures aimed at combating it. Many critics are therefore calling this a discriminatory policy rather than a security one. They point out all the countries listed have majority black or Muslim populations. So, rational or racist? Let's turn to our guest. Spencer Critchley is a former advisor to Democrat President Obama and the author of Patriots of Two Nations, Why Trump Was Inevitable and What Happens Next. Spencer, welcome to Middle East Eye.
Thank you.
The White House says that this is about national security. This will stop foreign terrorists coming to the US. Will it?
No, and that's not what this is about. And by the way, a minor adjustment to your description of me. I advised both of the Obama campaigns, not President Obama personally while he was in office.
Apologies. Thank you for correcting.
It seems like a technical distinction, but it matters to me. No, this is, first of all, in the immediate case, this is a distraction. And understanding Donald Trump's behavior is made a lot easier if you just simply look at the authoritarian playbook, as it's often called. What do authoritarians do, especially when they're trying to attack a democracy and turn it into an autocracy? And one of the things they must do all the time is distract the population from what's really happening. One way I describe this is that the authoritarian will exploit nationalist or racial or religious pride and hatred in order to distract the population away from what they're really doing. And the evil bargain, basically, they're striking with the population is essentially, you get feelings and I get power. So I fire up your passionate feelings about nationalist, religious, or racial pride. And while you're distracted with all of that, I get more and more power. The other aspect of this that Trump needs to distract people away from in the immediate term is how badly things have been going during his second administration, even worse than during the first administration. And, from his tariff policy to this new gigantic bill going through Congress, which will explode the national deficit and debt beyond anything ever seen in history, and in the process, essentially rob from the poor and give to the rich. This is the other main reason I believe that Trump needs to distract the population.
There is another common demographic that many have pointed to here, and that is Muslim majority populations across these countries. Now, Trump originally, before his first term, campaigned on a mantra of introducing a total ban on Muslims from entering the US. Over the years, his rhetoric has fluctuated. In some cases, he's denied this is to do with Islam. In others, he's just conflated Islam and terrorism into one. We've put together some of these statements from his original campaigning in 2015 up to the present day. Let's just take a quick look.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. Secondly, I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here. Totally, it's not a Muslim ban, but we're totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. And I will restore my travel ban to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of our country. We don't want our buildings blown up. We don't want to have problems. We will not let what happened in Europe happen to America. That is why today I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others.
Spencer, back to you. Is this policy, is this travel ban Islamophobic?
Oh yes, I mean that's just of the essence of Donald Trump's entire political career, going back to his adoption of the racist birther lie about President Obama supposedly having been born in Kenya. Something that Trump obviously knew was not true, which should have been disqualifying way back then, since it demonstrated that he was both a racist and a liar. He's been doing that ever since. It's central to what he does. And sometimes, when we're discussing this with Donald Trump, about Donald Trump, in the effort to be balanced, which I think is extremely important in legitimate journalism, somebody like Trump can exploit that, and we almost have to pretend that we're stupid and we don't see exactly what we're seeing. Racism and religious bigotry don't explain everything about Trump, and I go into this in detail in my book, but they do explain a lot, and he does exploit it as a central part of his political strategy. I guess another way of saying that is not everyone who supports Donald Trump is a racist. Their behavior can't simply be explained in all cases by racism or religious bigotry, but it is absolutely central to his political strategy.
Nevertheless, we've seen racialized attacks of all shades rise and rise. And since October 7th, we've seen anti-Semitic attacks and, to an even greater extreme, Islamophobic attacks increase. This includes during Biden's administration. And during the campaign for the last election, data shows that the Democrats saw massive losses among Arab and Muslim voters. So what are Democrats doing? Are Democrats winning back the trust of these populations? Are they doing anything to combat this?
Democrats, unfortunately, are in quite a state of disarray and disorganization at the moment. And I think, frankly, they need to rediscover their backbone, the values they stand for. This is actually the subject of the book I'm working on currently, is the liberal backbone. And I think there's a problem that Democrats are facing from both Muslim Americans, Jewish Americans, and also the communities of both of those faiths across the world. There are many Jewish Americans who feel that the Biden administration didn't stand up strongly enough for them. And of course, as you note, there are many Muslim and Arab Americans who feel exactly the same way. To me, the unifying value here is to stand up for the rights of civilians against these authoritarian leaders and organizations that exploit them to pursue power. So, the problem with Hamas is that it's a terrorist organization and a criminal organization. And the problem with what the Netanyahu government is doing is they're essentially mirroring the behavior of Hamas. And so I don't think that the solution is to choose whether you are on the side of Hamas or the Netanyahu administration. I think, from my point of view, the people whose side we should be on is civilians, whoever they are, whether they live in Gaza or in Israel or anywhere else.
In his announcement, Trump cited anti-Semitism as a specific motive for this travel ban. He said Sunday's attack in Boulder, Colorado, points to the importance of the policy. Now, the suspect in that attack is identified as an Egyptian national, yet, as many point out, Egypt isn't even on the list. Is this a policy that in any way will protect Jews in America? Or is this more exploitation of anti-Semitism by policymakers excusing racism? Go ahead.
No, absolutely, that's what it is. And, the Trump administration is clearly just exploiting the cause of fighting anti-Semitism the same way as it uses it to justify its attack on Harvard and Columbia and other universities in the United States. This is the same president and set of senior aides who have dinner with among the worst anti-Semites in America, who speak out in support of the AfD party in Germany, which is descended from the Nazi party, who recently made a special case to allow white South African refugees into the United States, so-called refugees into the United States, while turning away other refugees from the rest of the world, notably, of course, from countries that don't happen to be white. So, again, in order not to recognize this, we're required to pretend to be stupid. And this doesn't require adopting any particular ideological stance, I don't believe. You don't need to be a liberal Democrat as I am. There are plenty of Republicans and conservatives in the United States who feel exactly the same way. It's a question of whether or not you believe in the basic principles on which the United States was founded, which essentially come down to freedom and equality for everybody.
Now, shortly after he first took office in 2017, Trump tried to ban travelers from 7 mostly Muslim countries. And this immediately led to chaos and confusion. Hundreds were detained at airports, tens of thousands of provisional visas were revoked, and federal judges blocked the ban immediately. What's to say that this time around will be any different? What's to say that it will even make it through the courts?
Well, we have to hope that the courts continue their generally good record of standing for the laws and the Constitution of the United States instead of marching in lockstep with the president, which is, of course, what he expects and demands, and which, of course, is also another fundamental principle found in the authoritarian playbook. You co-opt the independent judiciary and just make them yet another organ for carrying out the will of the maximum leader. So I certainly hope that this gets blocked in the courts. And so far, as I say, the record of the courts has been pretty good. On the other hand, politically, it's not actually necessary for Trump to prevail in court. This could fail the way his tariff policies have been largely blocked in the courts, the way a lot of his deportation actions, which are also just horrifying in the context of American history. It's just among the worst things we've ever seen, and we never imagined we'd see this sort of thing again. Politically, he doesn't necessarily have to win, because just by being seen to try to do this stuff, he fires up the nationalist and racial and religious passions in his base, and once again, the transaction is they get feelings and he gets power.
Spencer Critchley, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, next up, we speak with an Israeli academic about whether the international pressure mounting on Netanyahu is being felt by ordinary Israelis.
Welcome back to MEELive. Public support for Israel in European countries has fallen to its lowest level on record. That's according to a new YouGov poll. When asked about Israel's actions in Gaza, more than half of all those surveyed said they were not justified, with less than a quarter believing Israel was in the right. And regarding who they sided with, more than double those surveyed in the UK and Spain said they sympathized more with Palestinians than Israelis. Now, last month, the UK, Canada, and France released a joint statement condemning the starvation of Palestinians in Gaza under a 3-month blockade on international aid. They also vowed concrete action if Israel didn't reverse course. The UK followed it by summoning the Israeli ambassador and suspending free trade talks. In a week's time from now, France will co-chair a UN conference with Saudi Arabia calling for recognition of a Palestinian state, which could grant the Palestinians greater legitimacy at the UN and the ability to take Israel to international court on their own behalf. France's President Emmanuel Macron has reportedly also been lobbying other countries to step up and recognize Palestine, calling it a moral duty and a political necessity.
If we abandon Gaza, if we consider there is a free path for Israel, even if we do condemn the terrorist attacks, we kill our own credibility in the rest of the world. And this is why we do reject double standard, and this is why I think it's very important in our current environment to be consistent and to follow our principles, our rules, and to consider that what is at stake is clearly the global order, and what is at stake is our credibility to protect this global order.
Now, all of this has had little impact on the Netanyahu government, which continues to expand its military occupation of Gaza, displacing the majority of its population and depriving them of aid. Netanyahu himself struck back angrily at Macron, saying that Israel will not stop and will not surrender. But is rising diplomatic pressure on Israel changing how Israelis themselves see the ongoing genocide in Gaza? To tell us more, we're joined now by Israeli academic and philosopher Anat Matar. Anat, thank you so much for being with us.
More or less, just a minute.
So we're just waiting for a second for Anat to join us. And of course, the pressure diplomatically on Israel from many of its European allies has intensified, as we've talked about over the last few weeks. And those polls are now suggesting that support for Israel has dropped to record lows in the UK, France, and Germany. Anat, thank you for being with us. Does all of this have an impact on how Israelis themselves feel about the war that their government is waging on their behalf?
Hi, hello, thanks for having me. Yes, I think, but not for the whole population. I mean, we've seen recently, it started a while after Israel resumed its war, or whatever, it's genocide, actually, it's not a war, in March 18th. But it took some time until that sank. And then liberal intellectuals, people who were protesting against Netanyahu throughout the last years, realized that I think the West started to be annoyed. And I think they somehow maneuvered their way out of the indifferent or whatever position that they held before. It could have been indifferent, it could have been supportive of the war, and we're talking about different studies. It's a very, very long period that we're talking about. So what was true for October, November, December 23 was no longer true for some of those people at the end of 24, say. But since March, and especially since we've heard exactly what you said, I mean, this uproar by the allies, I mean, people, they think themselves as part of, I mean, these intellectuals, they see themselves as part of the intellectual or liberal left or the West. And now I think they're finding their way alongside that. So you see much more protests against the war. They still call it a war, by the way. So much more protests, even in my university and other universities. Somehow things were shaken up. And we've been protesting since, I think, October. And only very recently other people joined, which I found really, it's good that it happened. It's not good that it happened so late, but it's good that it's happening.
I want to dig a little more into this, because when you listen to the statements coming from Israeli officials, whether the Netanyahu government or whether at the United Nations, you get this recurring theme that the entire world is against Israel unfairly, the United Nations itself is against Israel, European leaders are targeting Israel unfairly, that there is this double standard that Israel is being held to internationally. Do you think Israelis themselves, when they hear this criticism coming from overseas, are they following this line that their government is holding, or do they believe this criticism to be legitimate?
Again, I think that the Israeli population is split, almost half and half if you ignore my margin, which is not part of any half. But let's forget about that. So the Jewish majority, I think, is divided more or less in two halves. And one half will go after Netanyahu, whatever he says. And they're still supporting of whatever remains of that war, and they even don't really care, even if they say that they do, about the hostages. They're saying, yeah, we want them free, but not at the expense of the holy war. So yeah, these people will buy whatever slogan. And for them, Israel is the eternal victim, and that's it. And nothing will change that. The other population is the one, I mean, in degradations, but I think that the other population starts realizing that maybe in this case we are not the sole victim.
Last month, when Israel began allowing a trickle of aid into Gaza under the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Netanyahu had to justify it to his own public, saying that this is going to shield Israel from pressure that it was under from its allies and allow it to continue the war. What kind of pressure do you think Israel is feeling in real terms from its allies right now?
I really don't think it's feeling any pressure, I must say. I don't buy this. Because there is no pressure. When you look at the ground, Israel has a total impunity. And we've seen that all along. And we've seen that since October 23, of course. But we also have seen this after March. I mean, when Israel really explicitly breached the agreement it was signed on. So, I mean, it cannot be denied. And still they are accusing anyone else who doesn't agree with them. And no, and I don't see any uproar, not in England, not in yes, we've seen Macron, and we've seen Starmer, and we've seen Lamy in England, and and we've seen in Canada and Norway, in other places. But where are the real sanctions? Where is something that goes beyond words? So they're contemplating of putting aside an agreement, and they're contemplating some symbolic steps, but I don't see the real payment.
Now, many
it is my own conviction that until a real payment will come, nothing will happen.
Now, you mentioned sanctions there. You have been one of those voices at the forefront of calling for sanctions against Israel. Why do you hold this position?
Because I don't think anything else will change the situation here. I really don't think anything else. I'm not sure this will help, by the way, because of course there may be the knee-jerk reaction that they sanction us, we hate them even more, and they're anti-Semite and whatever. So it may be the case, but any other option was already tried.
No.
What? Reproaches, articles in the papers, expositions in the New York Times, new discoveries in the Guardian, whatever. I mean, but nothing really changed.
You talked before about that sliver that you consider yourself a part of in Israeli society. What does it mean for someone like you to say something like this publicly in Israel, describing the public mood that you are saying, describing these two groups that are, they're both essentially against the war, but on different levels. What does it mean for somebody to call for sanctions against their own country, given this climate?
Yeah. Well, it's not easy, but I've been used to it for years. So just that the last couple of years were particularly heavy, and they were heavy, they are heavy. And still, we have hostages in both sides and prisoners in both sides in terrible conditions in both sides. And I care about both sides. And I've been involved for years in committees for the Palestinian prisoners, and I know what the situation in the Israeli prison is. So, I worry. It's not an easy period for me to live in Israel or anywhere, because I don't think I would change anything if I was abroad. But I have my circle of friends and comrades, and we've been protesting together from, very early on. We've known each other for many years. That helps. That helps.
And I mean, what do you take hope in, and where do you find strength to continue carving this very lonely path that you're on?
Well, I don't see any hope at the moment. I hope I'm mistaken about hope, but the strength, well, I've got it, and I think many because of my experience, many because of the so many years that I've been active. It gives you some energy to keep going. And as I said, I mean, there is this cluster of friends and comrades that we hold each other together.
Now, today, there was this explosive story that we saw about the Israeli government all but confirming that it has been arming gangs inside of Gaza, affiliated some of its members with ISIS. What do you make of this story?
I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it's true because, first of all, not because of Lieberman or other people. I don't buy what they're saying, but it was covered in Haaretz, which is a reliable source, and I know that when they say they have reliable sources, then they do. But I also remember it from months ago. I remember people I've been in touch with in Gaza directly, telling me that that Israel disrupts the ordinary functioning of the aid delivery, and then that it supports the gangs. And that was months ago. I can't recall now, but it was months ago, and it came from many people just I know or friends know. So it was on the background already then. But then now you have names, you have faces, you have pictures, you have TikToks, and yeah, I'm sure this is true. And it's actually very typical when you think about Israel's behavior all along. Why not? It's so obvious that this would be the road.
It does betray a kind of cynical thinking when it comes to the way that the government chooses to pursue military. It's the way that it chooses allies in a place like Gaza, the way that it would arm one faction to go after another. It is quite a far cry from the refrain that you hear from a lot of Israeli spokespeople about the IDF being the most moral army in the world and things of that nature. I mean, how do you think the Israeli public, the ones that you say are following Netanyahu blindly wherever he goes, how do they justify for themselves some of these tactics that might be difficult to hear about?
Well, I don't know about them, really, because I cannot fathom what the supporter of Netanyahu really thinks. Because we know Netanyahu. They may say that, yes, we're against Hamas and anything that can bring down Hamas is in our side. But this is what they said, when they supported Hamas years ago. So, this is what I'm saying, that this is not the first time. It's not a surprise that Israel behaves like that. So if they feel okay with all of Israel's history, then they would feel okay now. If they don't, then okay, they will be critical. And I'm sure we will hear from that liberal part that I was mentioning in the beginning. I'm sure that we will hear critical voices. Ex-generals and all those people who just came to realize that the war is no longer profitable or something. They will criticize. I'm sure they will.
And finally, Anat, many Israeli voices that we have spoken to have said that only the pressure from the United States can have any influence on what Israel does and doesn't do. And we saw the U.S.'s position quite clearly again yesterday at the UN when they vetoed a call for a ceasefire that all the other members on the Security Council supported. Without the U.S. changing its position, if that doesn't happen on the horizon, what do you think the international community can do? Is there anything that they can do?
I'm sure they can do a lot. If they detach themselves from mommy, from the U.S. I mean, Europe is quite powerful. I mean, if they gather together and add this to the United Kingdom as well, this is a strong power. And actually, when Trump announced his tariffs, then you saw them, uniting and talking against it, and at least giving a sort of image of firm position. And then he retracted a little bit. So they can do this in relation to Gaza. They simply don't.
Anat Matar, thank you so much for joining us today. And that was Anat Matar, Israeli academic and philosopher. And you can read the rest of our coverage about everything that is happening on the ground in Gaza, including this breaking story about the armed gang that is unfolding across Israeli media right now, by going to our website, middleeasteye.net. And that is all the time that we have for you today. But before we lose you, of course, we would love to hear from you.
Please do send in your thoughts and questions. You can comment on the YouTube. You can reach out to us on social media at Middle East Eye, or email us at MEELive@middleeasteye.net.
Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know exactly when we go live. It happens right here every Tuesday and Thursday, 5 p.m. UK time and 12 p.m. Eastern time.
See you then.